Hello and welcome to Culture Conversations. I'm Craig Foreman, your guide through the ever-evolving world of organizational culture. Here we engage in real, unscripted conversations with the changemakers actively shaping our workplaces. From innovative strategies to heartfelt insights, each conversation is a step towards making work better for us all. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Culture Conversations. Hello and welcome to Culture Conversations. My guest today is Lars Schmidt. For those listening to this podcast, probably a few of you, if that, don't know who he is. So let me tell you a little bit about Lars. He started his career in talent, working for companies like Ticketmaster and NPR. And then he went on to start Amplify Talent in 2013, which is an executive search and consultancy firm, which led to his HR open source initiative, where he first came on my screen, collecting information and resources from across the space and then organizing them and offering them back out so people had a place to go and find the resources they needed in a world where HR people weren't as well connected. And I think many people think of him as a real big gift he gave in that. He went on to write Redefining HR, the book, which is also quite popular, and started the Redefining Work podcast. He's a speaker, he's a thought leader. You'll see him at conferences, and most recently, he has launched the Amplify Talent community, which is an amazing community of professionals and resources. So if that's somewhere, if you're looking to connect with others, definitely go there. For me, he was one of those bigger than life people in the HR space. There were a few years where I knew who he was. It was like, wow, wouldn't it be great to know that guy one day? I learned from him. I followed his work. And then in the Clubhouse days, which to me is the middle of COVID, I had started a Clubhouse room talking about workplace issues and how we can show up differently and HR things. And I invited him to come on and he said yes. And it was a great conversation. We did a few of those and it really began a friendship, a partnership, a relationship, and a mentorship, I'd say, where he's been really important to me. And I've reached out to him along the way and we crossed paths. He's inspired and helped me. So he's as plugged in as it gets, and he's as much of a learner as he is a teacher, which is so inspiring. On today's conversation, we talk about the evolution of HR practices, so moving from reactional to more strategic in our approach. We talk about personal journeys and professional insights, and the two of us share a couple things personally that are deep and will come out in this conversation. But what we do is talk about how do these things in our lives impact and shape how we've shown up in our careers. And I think that's really interesting for anybody listening to this and wanting to build a career, particularly in the space of people and culture. And finally, embracing AI in HR, right? So advice on the necessity of exploring and tinkering and playing with these tools to stay ahead. So with that, I am excited to bring you the one and only Lars Schmidt. Lars, thank you for being here on Culture Conversations.
Craig, it's good to be here, buddy.
It's good to be with you. I'm really always grateful to spend time with you, but also thanks for accepting, especially this kind of podcast where everything goes and we're just having a conversation. And nobody I'd rather do it with than you, Lars.
That's kind. And these are the most fun kind of podcasts anyway. Like we don't need scripts. Let's just get into some stuff.
I was thinking, it's funny. I know I've been, I follow you and like hopefully others do. And I last night one of your new episodes popped up. I listened to it and I think you call it The Riff. And I love it because it's the same spirit of like, we can get people. I think some of us just are free, are able to do that, to just get people on that are interested in the space. Things are moving so quickly and just have conversations. So yeah, it's exciting to be able to do it with somebody that I know also it has no problem with that. So
yeah, no, it's fun. Like we kind of launched the Riff as a experimental format of Redefining Works. It was AJ Thomas, Q Hamarani, and I. And we're just good friends. And we always just, outside of this, riff on whatever current events are happening in the space. And so we're like, well, why don't we record this? And it'll be unscripted. We'll just pick a topic and there's no advanced prep. It's just like, what's a topic? It's X. Okay, let's go. And dig into that. So it's a lot of fun.
Especially, this. And I used to say before the pandemic, people came together in our space to basically find the playbook, right? Who's got it? Who did this?
Yeah.
And through the pandemic and now, there is no playbook, and one day, hopefully there may be again, but in the immediate future is letting go of that. And it's where I'm going is it's these conversations that we need to have these often and a lot because things are moving. I mean, think 6 months ago, we probably weren't even talking about AI and look at us now. So
yeah, so certainly not like we are now. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I agree.
So let's start. For anybody that may not know you, which may be rare, I imagine people who are listening to this podcast know who you are, but who's Lars Schmidt? Like just a kind of high level overview of who you are and what you're doing in the world.
This is audio, so I know you can't see this, but as of today, I'm a guy with a mustache. That's because we're currently recording this in November, and this is my 15th Movember campaign. So that's a little fun. But yeah, 15 years. It's a long time. It's a lot of mustache growing in those years. But I'm I'm a husband, I'm a dad, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a student. I'm the founder of Amplify Talent. So from a business perspective, we do HR executive search, and we run a leadership and growth community called the Amplify Talent Community. I host a podcast called Redefining Work. I've written a few books on modern HR and cover modern work practices for fast companies. So it's a lot of things to talk about. Really, at my core, like my mission is building a better world of work by elevating the field of HR. And so really that's the thing, right? If you're like, what do you do? Give me one sentence. That's the sentence. All these other things help do that in some way, but that's really the core thing.
Yeah. I've always felt a kindred spirit in you too. And it's interesting because when I talk to you, I know there's a bit of the story with you of the background's talent, but everything I see and where you show up in my life is more of a fellow person that's out in the world trying to learn, amplify, share stories around HR in general. And, with me, I'd say my background's organizational psychology and things, yet my work, I feel like, goes much bigger than that. It's sort of the same curiosity that leads me and wanting to help the world work better. So yeah, like, how do you think about that? You're like, where does talent play in? Is that kind of just where you came up through? Is it still, how much, like, how's that fit for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. Like I came up, on the corporate side. Before I left corporate, I ran global recruiting and talent teams. So Ticketmaster, Magento, and NPR as part of their digital transformation. So I kind of came up through recruiting. That's where I go deep. Obviously, our practice is an HR executive search practice is one of the core kind of pillars. So that's still an area that I'm very close to and where I go deep personally from an experience standpoint. I think the broadening to HR more generally speaking was, in 2015, when Ambrosia Vertesi and I co-founded HR Open Source, at the time, there were a lot of great communities and platforms and resources supporting advancement in recruiting. There were not a lot supporting advancement in HR. And that was really one of the driving forces behind us launching HR Open Source. And, that kind of partnership, Ambrosia came up through HR. She was the CPO of Hootsuite at the time. I came up through recruiting. We both had deep perspectives and sensibilities in our given areas. But for me, I think it was that moment, and I can give you a year, right? 2015, when we launched that, where I'm just like, HR needs more support. HR is still very siloed, very, war for talent mentality in terms of trading, practices and collaborating and templates and resources. And that was, again, why we created HR Open Source. But that's where I started kind of going down more of that HR path, because I was being groomed to be a CPO. I wanted to be a CPO before I left corporate. And so, the interest was there, the curiosity was there, but I felt that I could do more good. That sounds cheesy saying, but like, I felt that I could add more value stepping into that space where I think there was more room for people, accelerating innovation in HR than in recruiting specifically, because I felt that was already a pretty connected and collaborative and forward-leaning field.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And selfishly, I'm happy that you went this route and shared more of you with the world. And yeah, so that's interesting. And this idea of the amplification, it's funny, two things. One is that makes sense, right? That why would all of us? You may be very busy with the talent, but that's not as forward facing as what most of us see, which is the content and the sharing. And I think from the first time you came on my radar, wasn't really around. I remember really feeling that before I even knew you, was this energy of your whole thing was that open source, that sharing has always kind of driven you. I think that amplify culture, one of our values, amplify others. And I always thought about that too in my journey of like, how do I use this platform, share as much as possible because I can to help this whole thing. And it seems like that was kind of a big driving force for you. What about what I spoke about? I mean, I'm just thinking about as we talk about it, what I said about how it used to be and how it is now, right? That like from a person that's an open source sharing, trying to get the right playbooks to the right people in the early days, how has that shifted? How is that the same? Like, let's just like bring that current. Like, how do you think about that now?
Oh, wow. I mean, I literally wrote a book on this in Redefining HR. So I have some thoughts. I'll try to simplify it. I think we've come a long way, right? I think that the default is more open source and collaborative for most practitioners today than it was kind of trade secret and proprietary. I don't know of any what I would consider to be forward thinking, progressive chief people officers who don't believe in collaboration. Zero. I don't know any who don't lean on their peer networks to share how they're responding to current events, lean on each other when they need that, moral support, which they often do. I don't know any that I would kind of put on the Mount Rushmore of HR and people leadership. And that's a very US centric comment, I realize, for those of you listeners in other parts of the world, but you can Google it, it'll make sense. But there's certain, anybody who I would put on that is not somebody who subscribes to that legacy thinking. So I think, just to kind of delineate the two a bit, legacy HR was very reactive and transactional. Modern HR is very proactive and strategic. Legacy HR believed in command and control constructs where everything flowed through HR. They felt that control was a pathway to power. It wasn't. It pissed employees off, and it made us, gave us this rap of being like the policy cops, right? Modern HR is about decentralizing. It's about empowering managers, employees to do that work and being there to support what they need, but more about creating guardrails than like rigid policies around every possible thing. Legacy HR came from a compliance background. It was all about risk aversion. How do you keep the company out of trouble? Modern HR is a business function. It's how you achieve your company goals, your revenue goals, right? Things that historically weren't really associated with HR, but absolutely are and best in class. So those are just a few of the kind of compare and contrast, I would say, between kind of legacy mindsets and practices and modern.
Anything you like now is like this last year and a half, like shifts that you're seeing in the now of work.
Yeah, I mean, how many hours? I don't know. That'll help me timestamp this effectively.
That's 3. That's like only 2 weeks at this point.
Look, I think that story is still being written, right? I mean, we're working through. There isn't a script for what we're experiencing now, and as soon as you think you have a script, the story changes, and you have to adapt. So that volatility, that need to constantly adapt and change and evolve and learn and decipher and distill and act based on new information and new trends and new practices and new expectations. That's part of like, we're in this constantly, VUCA and fluid world. That's what the now, and throw as many nows as you want on there. Like, I feel like that's where we're going to be.
Lars, I can't go. Yeah. I'm not ready for 4.
I mean, 5 is going to be scary. I'll just say that right
coming.
now.
It's coming fast, but I just want to stay with 3 for now.
Yeah. Okay. So, but I think it is like, again, it's that change. And I think that probably the thing that is shifting, and this isn't necessarily new to the year and a half, because this goes back to the pandemic really, but like how we think about our own well-being, how we think about, self-care, how we think about resilience, how we think about, healthy boundaries and things like that, especially as CPOs. Because I mean, the HR department, I affectionately refer to it as the department of +1. Lately, because I feel like all these things that keep coming up, it's like, oh, well, HR will handle that. Well, we're not built to handle that. We're not resourced to handle that. We're not funded to handle that. Yet we keep getting these things put on our plate, and we have to adapt to that. And so learning how to navigate that is a skill that we probably didn't have, certainly to the scale that we have to do it prior to, the now of work.
Yeah.
But it's very much where we are now.
Yeah. And I think as you're speaking, a couple thoughts. One is like, you spoke about that transition of what HR was historically. It is changing, but there's still some legacy, right? So the fact that the organization keeps going back to HR, the reality is if we are decentralizing, if we are changing these organizational models, the work of HR is how do we empower the entire whole?
Yeah.
And how do we get the organization to stop looking to HR every time? Like the job of HR isn't to fix and solve. I mean, I think about my work, right? Yeah, of course I work with HR. I mean, I think employee listening, especially as we're dispersed, is critical. It's what you just said in the VUCA sense, right? We have to listen and respond and react fast and adapt and keep. And how do you listen to 1,000 people across 5 countries quickly, efficiently, in a valid and reliable way? So that's right. But the point is still, I'm working with HR people to bring that muscle into the organization, but very quickly asking them, how do we, if you just own this, if this is your job, then it's how do you usher this into the organization so the managers, the leaders, the directors, empowering that organization. And it's to me, it's this bigger shift in our organizational models, our organizational structures. And it's happening regardless. It's just how can we do it in the least painful way and support organizations, because people are influenced, impacted by these decisions at the organization as we go through this.
Yeah, look, it's a shift that is as simple as like HR of the past was designing for, HR of today is co-creating with. And that's a very big shift, right? Because it's not about like us going back in an office somewhere and like designing some policy that takes 18 months and then just saying, here you go. It's like, it's listening, it's collaborating, it's iterating with it. It's getting an MVP out there that you can learn from, right? It's like, and that's just, I think when you look at how the field have evolved, one of the biggest accelerants of our evolution, in addition to open source, is that it's no longer an insular field. People are coming into HR and people operations from other areas of the business. People are moving from HR into the business and back into HR. And it's brought in this new set of skills and mindsets and thinking and kind of product mentality about how we do our work. And even Josh Burson has a really interesting kind of ethos for the future of HR called systemic HR, which is what they're kind of, the Burson Academy is leaning into, this year in terms of like the whole new model of how to think about HR. And it's more about, again, just like building some of these things so we're not in response mode to all of these individual things that happen. That's not where we add value.
Exactly. Wow. Okay. So here's what I think. I think that opening was awesome and really gave her a lot of background to you, how you think, kind of this big picture HR. But I'm going to change gears. I think we're going to do this differently. And I said this, and I think there's only one person I can do something like this with. I still want to keep it focused on what we talk about in the world, but you and I, both from getting to know you and watching your work, have, I think, some similar unique things that we share in common. So what I want to do is I want to go through these one by one and talk about them both, in the fun and what it is that it's unique, but also maybe how that's impacted us in our lives and our world. So tying these commonalities together, about the two of us, our work in the world, but also kind of on a personal sense. So
yeah,
how do you feel about that?
Let's do it.
You want to do it?
Yeah.
I'm going to start easy. Start an easy one. You and I share an interesting, our story or our journeys, at some level. And I think you'll give some clarity to me, come from the same place. So I live in California. I've been in California almost 20 years now. I grew up in Florida. I went to University of Central Florida. You are one of the few HR voices out there that I just know. I hear about it. You went to Florida State University. I think, did you grow up in Florida or just outside? Were you like in Georgia?
No, I grew up. Yeah, I moved to Florida when I was 5. Lived in a town called Stewart in South Florida most of my life, and then went to school at Florida State.
And so I grew up in Orlando, Florida, and then I went to military, and then University of Central Florida. How did that part of the country, growing up Florida, like, I don't know where I'm going with this one other than I think it's unique, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, and let's just see where this takes us for a second.
Yeah. I mean, look, when I grew up, Stewart was a small kind of, beach town in South Florida, pretty diverse mix of people, and it was 80s and 90s, right? Mm-hmm. So it was, sports driven. I grew up as a skater, right. Pretty much most people live there. You played sports, you surfed, you skated. Some did all three. And so it was, it was an interesting place. It was a really fun place to grow up. There's a lot to do, especially for outdoor type stuff. South Florida, you can be doing outdoor things year round. So, but it was also the town that I knew when I graduated, I wanted to get as far away from as possible. And I don't say that in a negative way, but like for whatever reason, like I always knew that I wanted to move to California. Even when I went to college, I think at the time I thought that I wanted to pursue acting. Like I thought that was kind of a path that I might want to go down. And so I knew I wanted to move to LA specifically. And actually that's how I got into recruiting. Was there's only one company that came on campus that had an office in LA, and they happened to be a technical recruiting firm. So I was like, I have no idea what that even means. Like I was a marketing international business major. I always thought I'd get into advertising, but I was like, but it'll get me to LA. So I'll interview and see. And I like the team, and, fast forward. No, this is a technical recruiting agency called Pencom Systems.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you move to LA?
I did. Yeah. So the way that they hired at the time is they hired like rookie classes. So people like 50 people, students, mostly, new graduates. Some people had been out for a couple of years, all around the country. And they brought them to New York for 6 months of training on recruiting and technology and everything that comes with that. And then you would get assigned to your office. So after graduation, I spent 6 months in New York and then moved out to LA from there.
That's cool. And that's a cool story. It's so funny. First of all, I also grew up performing theater. I love music. I still play music. So I didn't know that about you.
Yeah.
I too grew up in Orlando, different kind of Florida experience, but just same neck of the woods, so to speak. But also knew that I always was going to leave. I moved there when I was 5 as well.
Yep.
But I always felt this like that there was somewhere else for me, that wasn't where I belonged. My family used to joke that you're going to be in California one day. I joined the military to pay for college, and I got stationed in Monterey. And as soon as I came out to California, I was like, this is the place. So finished the military, went back to UCF, got my undergraduate in business, and came back to California. So I think that's interesting how that journey, that calling. Now you're in Virginia now, correct?
I am, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's just interesting backstory. I think getting to know you a little better. Okay. So let's go one layer deeper, something that you and I share. And let's talk about this from professional, or however you want to talk about this, but I think it's something I've leaned into the last few years. In my own journey of raising a family, when my daughter was young, there were some challenges, and we started doing some work and looking into it. We found out she had ADHD. And in that journey of learning about her and ADHD, there was a moment where I said, oh gosh, I think these things sound similar. And I also realized, and then I went and did my work and looked at it and got diagnosed with ADHD as well. For me, super helpful, something that, it's a little drop in the bucket to just even begin to understand what it is, to have some sort of diversity. So I lean into it in that way, but I also see it as a superpower. But I've talked to you, and you've mentioned to me that you also identify as having ADHD. So how do you think about that? How do you see that in your work? How do you think that professionally? Does it frame or shape how you see your work at a macro level and a micro level?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I want to, I'd love to give a profound answer, that it kind of revolutionized how I think about work. But for me, honestly, it didn't. And I'll kind of give my backstory. Probably about, almost 2 years ago, my wife started working with me. And before that, I'd been running the company by myself for 8 years. And, the portfolio of Amplify Talent and like the portfolio of Lars, for lack of a better word, between like media and podcasts and projects and speaking, there's always been a range of different things that I've been working on at any given time. And so I've always had to like task switch and context switch and move from one thing to another. And, I felt probably in a lot of ways that I was good at that, but I didn't understand the shortcomings of always doing that. And, after a few months of working with me, my wife actually recommended, you might want to get tested for ADHD. And I did, and turns out I did have it.
Yeah.
But it was kind of like, I was like, okay, well, I know that now. And, for a little while I took medication to support it. And I just, and again, this is like such an individualistic thing, right? So this isn't any statement on anything other than myself, but I didn't really notice that much of a difference when I took the medicine. And so I decided not to take it and to just be aware. Right. And like, maybe with that knowledge and that understanding, be more mindful of maybe how I construct my work day, and like how I think more of it is like, knowing what I'm prone to if I don't have any awareness of what those tendencies are. And, does that mean that I'm like now in complete control? Like, absolutely not. But I think it is, I look at it more, and again, this is just my individual particular use case, is like, it's a gift to be able to kind of work on a variety of things and allow myself to like switch context between projects. Often it can become a liability if it goes unregulated. So I think that awareness makes me try to at least bring a bit more structure to it. I'm certainly not always successful with that. But it wasn't like a completely profound, life-changing event, for me personally.
Has it changed just in the conversations, having diagnosed it later in your journey, doing this work? And this is where I judge similarities with HR, with people teams, with, and then coming to like there's something that in your life, some sort of neurodiversity or some sort of difference. Did it impact at all? Like as you do your interviews, as you talk to people, as you're thinking about organizational stuff, has it had any kind of like change in your approach?
Honestly, it hasn't. And frankly, like when I like self-identify, for me, it doesn't even rise to the point where I self-identify as neurodiverse. I don't. I mean, technically I suppose I am, but I don't know. I think for me, it's like I have a lot of things that are part of my identity stack, right? But that doesn't
like
factor into it.
Yeah.
For me, I have to give actually I can't own that. That's Darren Murph. I have to give Darren credit for that. I learned identity stack from him, and we talked about developing. I was like, oh, I love it. So yeah, but I can't cite that as my own. Darren Murph, props to him. Definitely follow him if you're not, because he's a gold mine for wisdom like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I ask also, you're one of the few people I talk to professionally about it. And I think my own journey, I think for me, I was in an organization at the time. So I was still inside like the corporate world. So one, it was this aha of like, well, maybe there are some small accommodations I can ask for myself that will just support, and also being able to communicate to people some of the things that I think used to be challenging that I can at least say, okay, I get it now. Let me just explain to people or tell them up front that I might be a little trickier. This is the way I work. I'm open to feedback. So I think that helped me in the corporate environment, coming to terms with that. But also, the biggest thing I hate about it is the name disorder. I mean, it's I think it's one of my best superpowers, and I'm so grateful now. Clearly, if your brain works the way 12% of the population does, and it's not 88% or whatever, there's whatever comes along with that. But I've always seen it as, how do I better communicate it, lean into it. I think with you, the reason I remember even asking you, and it was partly because I was seeing how much you were putting out and what you were doing, and how many different, I think I was almost picking up on all the switching you must be doing. That's why I think I even asked the first time, because I was like, wow, it was almost inspiration to me to say, like, all the content, all the stuff, running the business. Okay, like, talk to Lars about that. So you had impact on me. It was early in my journey when I talked to you about it. So I just appreciated it, and you did have an influence.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. All right, let's go one layer deeper. And I really, this is an interesting one. You've shared it even openly, and every year you share it. And it's something we share uniquely again. Both of us lost a brother to drug addiction, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. How, and again, I want to frame this in like getting to know you as a human and a person, but also if there's any sort of professional context as well. I mean, I know you share it on LinkedIn when it comes up, and I know that my journey with Andy died, he was 32, has impacted me in lots of ways, both professionally and personally. So it was just, I have you here. I knew we share that. So why not do it publicly and talk about this shared thing, and how has it changed your life, and what's the meaning in any sort of professional context?
Oh, wow. I mean, like, honestly, like professionally, I don't think anything other than trying to create more awareness for addiction.
There you go.
And trying to bring more of a spotlight to kind of humanize addiction. Like, I think that, again, like, I don't know about you, but I, before I lost my brother, like, I didn't know much about addiction. I'd never experienced addiction, nobody close to me that I was aware of. And I'm 1,000% certain there's many people who are close to me who battled addiction, but addictions or addicts are very good at keeping that a secret. So I didn't know. And I kind of, in the early days, after he died, I tried to learn more about addiction, because I wanted to know, like, what the experience, like, what was this like? And so I think from a professional sense, it's really just trying to bring more humanity to addiction, grief, loss, everything that comes with that, and the struggles that make us human. And the idea of just trying to, give a bit more grace around some of those things that maybe, we've been blessed that haven't impacted our lives, but do impact a lot of other lives.
Yeah. I think as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, same with like my thoughts on ADHD. And when I realized I had it, and saying, if this is one small thing that I can call out, and I've done it publicly, and, memcing Culture First Global and whatnot, speaking about it very, very publicly, that every time I do, more people kind of come out and say, thank you. Like, wow, I didn't, just to hear another voice say that, to normalize it. And I think the same thing with, with Andy and what you spoke about. One is addiction, period. So Andy passed away 12 years ago, and drug addiction was an issue, and opioids were addiction issues out. But from what I've seen in the news and whatnot, it's only gotten worse. And I still hold, even back when Andy passed away, if I went into a room and everybody's honest, how many people here have dealt with, been impacted by, have had a sibling, a parent, a child. And it just felt like, I think because of my experience going through that, and it felt so private and quiet, and no one talked about it. And then as I dug into it in my own journey and understanding this, realizing you walk into a room and almost everybody's been impacted, and no one talks about it. So it was my own journey too, of saying, like, I don't want to walk. I remember when he first passed away, I was almost a little bit of shame, and I didn't like that feeling. It was nothing shameful. My brother was sick, and he struggled, and he fought, and he had great wins along the way. And ultimately, and he said it, this lifestyle leads to two places, prison, or jail, or the grave. Honestly, if you keep living this way, I mean, those were his words.
Yeah.
And then you'd walk in a room and no one's talking about it. I think maybe it was my own realizing, I know this room is full of people that have experienced it. No one's saying anything. So how can we create more conversations, because we're impacted by this? Is real.
Yeah. I mean, look, and I think for me, it's like, I don't think a lot about like platform or reach or like standing in industry or those kind of things. Like those don't drive me anyway, but I know that I have like a degree of a platform and audience from just the books and the things that I've done. And so if I can leverage that in whatever way I can to just say, hey, you know what, like my brother died from opioid addiction, and like I grapple with grief and everything that comes with that, and like and share that story, it kind of keeps his memory alive. So
one final note, just as you're talking, I did some work along the way at Culture Amp and all the content we created, and working with people that help organizations do better when it comes to dealing with grief and loss in the workplace. You've probably come across this as well.
Yeah.
And I will say one aha for me was when I did that work with them, and I reflected back on when Andy passed away and when I went to work and how I didn't even know who to talk to. And that was weird. It took me like a couple of days to say anything. And then it was like I had 3 days. And I'd never even stopped to think about it until I met with them, and they were talking about policies and how we can think about this and how we can approach it. So I would say, to tie it back because of this podcast to an organizational perspective, was an awareness. And if we're not thoughtful, how unattentive we can be to grief in the workplace, and that it's real and people are dealing with it. At some point, if you have enough employees, grief is real. It's living in your workplace, and it's an area where it doesn't take it's not a lot of money. It's just intention.
Oh, for sure.
A better, more human workplace.
I mean, look, I think as we're having a very different conversation around mental health broadly today than we were in the past. And I mean, and I wrote a few pieces for Fast Company on that topic specifically, like how we need to think differently about how companies support employees who are carrying, grief, and then even addiction support, because, I think that there's so much challenge that a lot of employees have that we don't often talk about. And it's these invisible scars. I mean, much like the broader mental health conversation, right? It's like many of us carry invisible scars you'll never see. And there's not really a forum to kind of allow employees to bring that into a workplace, nor should we expect employees to bring them to, unless they choose to. But I think as employers, we have to get better at really thinking proactively about how we support, whether it's, bereavement leave, whether it's programs and policies, whatever it may be. I think we've got a lot of ground to cover.
Wow. You're absolutely right. I'm looking at the time. Speaking of ground to cover, it's amazing how fast it flies. I have one last topic. I'm not even going to chime in. I'm just going to let you give a couple thoughts on it, and then we're going to have to wrap this thing up. And it's also, we both share, it appears to me, an interest, curiosity, and passion for all these things that are coming with AI. I know you've been thinking about it from an HR perspective, high-level thoughts. AI, how should HR practitioners be thinking about approaching AI from your perspective right now?
Get in there immediately, tinker, play. Look, it's not a question of like, is this going to be the future? Like that, it's firmly the future. It's the present. And I think that, Professor Scott Galloway had a really interesting quote. He's like, AI is not going to take your job, but humans using AI will. Yep. And I think that that's extremely relevant. Like, we're recording this a week after OpenAI released GPTs, and now you have the ability to go in and create your own GPTs as a Plus user. Plus is the paid version of OpenAI. I've already done some around creating like strategy co-pilots for HR leaders. I mean, it's mind-boggling what you can create. And, are these things going to be turnkey? Are they cut and paste? No. But the way that I frame them is they give you a running start on almost anything. Like you don't have to start from scratch on anything. And there's a ton of power in that. Like, is there bias in it? Yes, you have to mitigate that. Is there, delusioning where it can kind of make up some things you'll have to fact check? Absolutely. So again, it's not perfect, but it's such a productivity leverage if you use this. And like the demands of our job aren't getting easier. They're only getting harder. So why not lean on some of these tools that can help bring more efficiencies and effectiveness to our work? So I'm bullish on it. Yes, there are risks. Yes, there are things you need to be mindful of. I encourage you to do that. But you can't sit on the sidelines and watch this develop, because it's happening at breakneck pace and speed. And if we're not paying attention, it's at our own peril and risk.
I agree 100%. And I think I'd say to anybody, just be where you are. You know, there's curves, there's always is with adoption, but please stay curious, learn like in your own way. Because I feel the same way. I heard the other, like lawyers aren't going to get replaced, but lawyers that use AI are going to replace lawyers. So it's the same sort of ideology. I think HR, like it or not, this is here. Learn it, use it. It's a powerful tool for productivity. Look, Lars, it's such a treat to get to hang out with you. You don't get to do it that often. Good to see you. I appreciate and thank you for taking this journey in a very different approach to a podcast. You know, that we went personal, but also kept it kind of in this realm. But I knew with you, we could do that. And I think that was something really special to bring to the table and to get for people to get to know you and see you in different ways from your content. How can people follow you, find you, get more of your stuff? Because it's amazing and I love it and it keeps me up to date. What should other people know about?
Well, look, I appreciate it. Before I even mention that, like I enjoyed it as well. I'm stoked to see you kind of take this next journey in your own career and kind of tell stories like only you can. So I'm stoked to be a part of it and appreciate the invitation. So the best hub for me is amplifytalent.com. So you can learn more about books, podcast, the community, executive search services, all the things that I walked you through in my way too long opening bio. It's all right there. And yeah, you can find me there.
I'll come in and wrap up by just giving the plug, Lars, that, you know, following you has been, you know, it's like you and Josh Burson, really, I think it's two people that have kept me informed and are really walking the walk, particularly you when you talk about, you know, sharing and getting out there and the open source. You've really done it and you've helped me in my journey. So to anybody listening, like definitely follow Lars. You can't go wrong. The content's great. Even your news. I just love your newsletter when it comes out. So, hey, thanks again. I know there's a long future ahead of us and I appreciate you taking the time today. And it was good to have you and see you here.
Yeah, likewise. You as well, Craig. And I'm stoked to, you know, hear all the kind of connective tissue we have in our backgrounds and past. So thanks for helping bring that to life.
Stack.
Yeah. Yeah. We got a lot of stacks.
All right, man.
All right, Craig, take care.